My boss looked at me in front of the entire office and said 4 words I will never forget. "Get on your knees." The room went completely silent. 23 people stopped typing. Phones were set down. Someone dropped a pen and nobody picked it up. His name was Philip Graves. He was 44 years old and had been regional manager of Crestfield Solutions for 11 years. He wore the same gray suit every Monday and kept a framed photo of himself with the company founder on his office wall, positioned so every visitor had to look at it. He stared at me with the flat expression he used when he wanted you to understand there was no choice. Like a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. What he did not know was that 4 minutes before he opened his mouth, I had already made a move that would change everything. I was not afraid of him. Not anymore. I was waiting. And there is a very large difference between those two things. I had worked at Crestfield Solutions for 3 years. The company handled logistics contracts for mid-size manufacturers across the region. We processed orders, managed supplier relationships, and tracked shipments every day. The work was not glamorous, but it paid well and I was good at it. My name is Nadine. I joined at 27 after a smaller firm downtown folded. Crestfield felt stable. It had structure and a clear hierarchy and a coffee machine that actually worked. What it also had was Philip Graves. I did not notice him properly in my first months. He stayed mostly in his office, sent long emails with read receipts enabled, and held Monday briefings that ended with him saying, "Let's make it count this week." Nobody ever responded out loud. My direct supervisor was a calm, competent woman named Vera. She buffered most of what came down from Philip and protected her team from the worst of his tempers. Then Vera left for a better position across the city. The buffer disappeared. Philip became the most present force in my working life. The change did not happen overnight. But it came steadily and it was impossible to miss once it started. The first sign happened 6 weeks after Vera left. Philip called a team meeting to review the quarterly numbers. We had exceeded our projection by 8%. That was a genuine result. People had worked hard. Philip stood at the front with the printed slides and went through each number. Then he said, "Good work. We got there." He said we. 2 days later I saw the internal report he submitted to the executive team. The language was entirely different. It said things like "under my direction" and "following the strategy one outlined." Our names were not mentioned anywhere. I brought it up quietly with my colleague Tobias, who had been at the company 2 years longer than me. He shrugged. "He does that every quarter," Tobias said. "Takes the wins. Shares the losses." "What do you mean shares the losses?" "You'll see. Just keep records of everything. Every email. Every decision. Keep copies on a personal drive." I thought he was being dramatic. I did not start keeping records that day. I wish more than anything that I had. Philip Graves had a particular way of humiliating people. He never did it in private. He waited for an audience. He had a precise instinct for the moment when the most people were present, and that was always when he chose to make someone feel small. It was not accidental. It was a system. There was Marcus, who handled our northern supplier accounts. One Tuesday morning Philip stopped him mid-sentence during a briefing to say, in front of everyone, that his presentation looked like something thrown together the night before. Marcus was 38 with 15 years of experience. He said nothing. He sat back down and stared at the table. There was Camille from operations, who made a minor scheduling error. Philip called her into his office and left the door wide open. Every word was audible to the entire floor. Camille walked out 20 minutes later and went straight to the bathroom. I watched all of this and told myself it would not happen to me. Not because I was special. Simply because I was careful. I documented everything. I double-checked my work. I stayed professional even when he was not. That belief lasted 2 more months. The project that changed everything was called the Hartwell account. Hartwell Manufacturing was one of our largest clients. They produced industrial components and shipped to warehouses across 4 states. Managing their account required precision. Deadlines were tight and the client's operations director Felix, Had a documented history of escalating complaints directly to our executives when anything went wrong. Philip assigned me to lead the Hartwell account in January. I understood what it meant. I spent 3 weeks building a new tracking system for their shipments and created a reporting template that gave Felix real-time visibility on every order. I restructured the communication schedule so he received updates before he needed to ask for them. By the end of the first month, Felix had sent our executive team an email calling our service the most organized it had been in 2 years. Philip forwarded it to me with a single line. "Good. Keep it up." That was everything. No team mention. No acknowledgement to anyone else. The compliment from Felix disappeared quietly into his sent folder. Kept working. I told myself results spoke for themselves. I was wrong. In March, something went wrong with the Hartwell account. A shipment from the Memphis facility was delayed by 48 hours. The cause was a data entry error in the third-party carrier system, not ours. I had the documentation to prove it. The carrier's correction notice. The original submission timestamp. An email chain showing we had flagged the potential issue 3 days before the delay occurred. Felix was unhappy. He sent a sharp message to our executives. Philip called me in that afternoon. I walked in prepared. I laid the documentation on his desk calmly and walked him through the timeline. I showed him the carrier's error and our advance warning. I was thorough and composed and believed the evidence was clear enough to end the conversation in 5 minutes. Philip looked at the papers without picking them up. "The client doesn't care whose fault it is," he said. "They care that it happened on your watch. The documentation shows." "I've seen the documentation, Nadine." He leaned back. "You own the outcomes, good and bad." He told me to send Felix a formal apology. I did. Felix accepted it. The matter should have been closed. It was not closed. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere around me changed. Philip began copying himself onto emails I sent to other departments. He started requesting daily updates on Hartwell, something he had never asked for before. He scheduled Friday one-on-ones that felt designed to find gaps rather than solve problems. In team meetings he interrupted me mid-sentence, rephrasing what I said as if my version needed correction. Once he waved his hand slightly while I was speaking and redirected the conversation before I finished. Tobias caught me in the break room. "He's building something," he said quietly. "I've seen him do this before." "Building what?" "A case. Doesn't matter if it's real. He just needs enough small things to point at." I asked what happened the last time. Tobias was quiet. "The person resigned before it reached the end. Philip prefers that. Cleaner." I went home that evening and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and did something I should have done months earlier. I began saving copies of everything onto a personal drive. Every email, every report, every decision I had made on the Hartwell account. Dated and organized. Tobias was right. Philip was building something. So was I. 3 weeks later, Philip called a full team meeting. All 23 staff members were present. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. The calendar invite had no agenda, just, "Important update. All staff required." I knew before I walked in that this was the moment Tobias had warned me about. Something in the way Philip had looked at me in the corridor that morning. Too steady. Too prepared. I sat in my usual chair, third from the left. Tobias was across from me. Camille was 2 seats down. I set my notebook on the table, folded my hands, and waited. Philip walked in at exactly 9 o'clock and did not sit down. That was unusual. He always sat before speaking. Standing meant he wanted the physical advantage. He started with a general update on quarterly targets and talked about client satisfaction metrics for 6 minutes. Then his voice changed, just slightly, just enough, and he turned to look directly at me. "There's been a situation with the Hartwell account," he said. "A pattern of mismanagement I've been monitoring for several weeks. I think it's time we addressed it directly." Every head in the room turned toward me. He spoke for 4 minutes. He described the Memphis delay as evidence of poor oversight. He referenced the communication issues with Felix as a reflection of disorganized account management. He mentioned 2 other minor incidents, a late report and a missed calendar update, that had been so small at the time that nobody had commented on them. Now he framed them as a pattern. Not once did he mention my documentation. Not once did he reference the carrier's error or our advance warning. He had taken the complete picture and removed half of it. Kept my expression still. I had practiced this, sitting in front of my bathroom mirror with my face neutral while imagining exactly this kind of moment, because I had known something like it was coming. When he finished, the room was quiet. I could feel people looking at me and then carefully away. The particular discomfort of witnessing injustice and being too uncertain to respond to it. Then Philip did something I had not fully anticipated. He looked at me in front of 23 people and said, "Nadine, this situation requires a full public acknowledgement of your failure. In front of this team." He paused for 2 seconds. "I'd like you to apologize. On your knees." The dropped pen hit the floor. Nobody moved. I want to tell you what it feels like to be in that room in that moment. The air becomes slightly thicker. Every sound turns down except your own heartbeat. The faces around you, people you have eaten lunch with for 3 years, go carefully, deliberately blank, because nobody wants to be the next target. I looked at Philip. He was not smiling. He was doing something worse. He looked patient, like a man completely certain his demand was reasonable. Like he had said things like this before and had always been obeyed. I felt something move through me. Not fear, although fear was underneath everything. What I felt most clearly was a kind of absolute certainty. The kind that arrives when a long period of doubt finally ends. I knew exactly what I had in my bag. I had placed it there 4 minutes before walking into the meeting room. A small digital recorder purchased 2 weeks earlier, which I had switched on in the corridor and slipped into the outer pocket of my bag before sitting down. Every word Philip had spoken for the past 9 minutes was recorded clearly on that device. I did not reach for the bag yet. I looked at Philip steadily and took one slow breath. Then I said 3 words. "I don't think so." The silence after those 3 words was different from the silence before them. The first silence had been shock. This one was something else. A room full of people realizing that the script had changed and nobody had the new lines. Philip's expression shifted. Just barely. A small tightening around the eyes that a less careful observer would have missed. But I had watched his face for months. I knew every variation. "I beg your pardon," he said. His voice was still controlled. But there was something new in it. Hairline crack. "I said I don't think so," I repeated. "I won't be apologizing. Not on my knees." Someone at the far end of the table made a small sound. I did not look away from Philip. "Nadine." He said my name the way he always said it when managing someone. Low and final. Like a period at the end of a sentence. "I'm going to give you a moment to reconsider." "I don't need a moment," I said. "But I think before this continues, the team should hear something." I reached into my bag. My fingers found the recorder. I placed it on the table in front of me and pressed play. The voice that came from that small device was Philip's. It was from a conversation 11 days earlier. In his office. Door closed. A conversation Philip had believed was entirely private. I had gone to him with concerns about how the Hartwell situation was being framed internally. I had been professional. I had brought documentation. And Philip, believing we were completely alone, had said things he never would have said with witnesses. He had told me the documentation did not matter. That when a client complained, someone on the team had to take the fall, and the most efficient outcome was for that person to be someone he could afford to lose. He had used those exact words. Someone he could afford to lose. He had also said the accounts team had been carrying dead weight for too long and that one visible consequence would be good for morale. Dead weight. He was describing me. My face. In a closed room. While I sat across from him holding proof of my innocence. The recording played for 90 seconds. Then it ended. The room was completely silent. Philip stood at the head of the table with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Took me a moment to name it. It was panic. "That recording is illegal," Philip said. His voice had changed completely. The patient's steadiness was gone. What replaced it was thin and pressured. "It isn't," I said. "Our state is a one-party consent state. One person in a conversation needs to consent to the recording. I was that person. I had spent 3 evenings researching this. I had called a legal advice line and confirmed it twice. The printed statute was in my bag. You had no right to. I had every right. And everything you said is accurate. I didn't edit anything." Philip looked around the room. I believe he was looking for support. For someone to agree this was outrageous. To help him regain control. But the faces around the table were completely different now. Marcus sat with both hands flat on the surface, staring at nothing. Camille had her arms crossed tightly. Tobias watched Philip with an expression that contained no sympathy. Philip turned back to me. "This meeting is over," he said. "Everyone back to work." Nobody moved immediately. In 3 years that had never happened before. What happened next was something I had prepared for but had not been certain would occur. The meeting room door opened. The woman who walked in was Patricia Osei, head of human resources at Crestfield Solutions. She was 51 years old, had been with the company for 16 years, and had a reputation for being methodical, thorough, and completely impossible to pressure. She was also someone I had contacted 8 days earlier. I had sent her a written complaint by email with the Hartwell documentation attached. I had described in specific, factual detail the pattern of behavior I had observed for months, including the incidents involving Marcus and Camille. And I had told her I believed a serious incident was being built toward, and I wanted it on record before it occurred. Patricia had responded the next day. She asked me 3 follow-up questions and told me she was looking into the matter. She had not told me what she planned to do or when. I had not known she would be here today. But I had given her enough that she decided, on her own, to attend. She stood in the doorway and looked at Philip. Then at me. Then at the recorder on the table. "Philip," she said calmly. "I need you to come with me." The room exhaled. Philip did not move immediately. For seconds passed where he stood at the head of the table calculating whether he still had any leverage. Running through options. Looking for a way to reframe what had just happened. Patricia waited without helping him. "Patricia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There will be time to discuss that. Please come with me now." Her voice was not unkind. But it was absolute. No version of that sentence contained a question mark. Philip picked up his phone and his notepad. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the room one more time. Not at me specifically but at the whole space, as if photographing the version of it where he had still been in control. Then he walked out. The silence he left behind was unlike anything I had experienced in 3 years of working in that building. It was not tense. It felt like the first breath after being underwater. Something releasing. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Marcus looked across the table at me. "How long have you been planning that?" he asked quietly. "Long enough," I said. Tobias made a short sound that was almost a laugh. Something that had been impossible suddenly becoming possible. "You told Patricia," he said. "I told Patricia," I confirmed. The rest of that Thursday was unlike any workday I had experienced before. Patricia met with Philip for 2 hours behind her closed office door. Nobody knew exactly what was being said. But everyone understood that the recorder on the table and the complaint I had filed had changed the shape of that conversation completely. Around midday, Patricia came out and asked Marcus and Camille to speak with her individually. I learned later that she had also pulled email records from the past 6 months and requested calendar histories and meeting logs. I sat at my desk and worked. Genuinely worked. I had 3 active accounts and they still needed attention regardless of what was happening in Patricia's office. I answered emails. I updated a tracking report. I ate lunch at my desk because I was not ready for the conversations that would happen in the communal kitchen. Tobias stopped by my desk at 2:30. He set a cup of coffee next to my keyboard, said, "You did the right thing," and walked back to his seat. That small gesture meant more than I expected. At 4 o'clock, Patricia's assistant sent me a calendar invitation for the following morning. The subject line read, "Formal review, Hartwell account, Nadine." My heart beat faster when I saw it. Not from fear. From knowing that what I had been carrying was about to be properly examined and given its correct weight. I did not sleep well that night. But it was not the bad kind of sleeplessness. It was the kind that comes when your mind is too active rather than too afraid. I lay in the dark, running through the timeline again. The documentation, the legal research, the recording, the complaint filed with Patricia 8 days earlier. Careful steps, built one at a time over weeks. I had not known it would unfold exactly this way. I had not been certain Patricia would attend the meeting. I had not known Philip would make that specific demand in front of everyone, although I had suspected something was coming. I had only known that when the moment arrived, I needed to have already done everything I could. My mother called that evening. She always had an instinct for when something significant was happening. I told her the short version. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were ready." 2 words. But she said them in the particular voice she used, not to offer comfort but to state a fact. Clear and matter-of-fact. Like confirming something that had always been true. I told her I would call her after tomorrow's meeting. I closed my eyes, let the room be quiet, and tried to rest. The meeting with Patricia lasted 90 minutes. She was thorough. She went through the documentation from my original complaint, reviewed the Hartwell email chain, and played back a portion of the recording. She asked precise questions about context. She was not warm exactly, but she was fair. Warm would have been reassuring me constantly. Fair meant asking hard questions of both sides and following where the evidence led. She asked why I had not come to HR sooner. I told her honestly that I had not been certain my concerns met a formal threshold, and that I was aware of the professional risk of filing against my direct manager. She wrote that down. She asked about the recorder. I gave her the printed legal statute. She reviewed it without expression and placed it in her folder. At the end, she told me the company was opening a formal investigation. Philip had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. She would inform me of the results within 10 business days. She thanked me for my thorough documentation. Then she said something I had not expected. "The complaint received this morning was not only from you. 2 other team members submitted written statements overnight." She did not say who. She did not need to. I thought of Marcus's hands flat on the table. I thought of Camille's crossed arms. And I understood. The 10 days that followed were the strangest working stretch of my career. Philip was gone. His office was dark. His name had been removed from the internal directory overnight. The Monday briefings that had run for exactly 40 minutes every week simply did not happen. The building without them felt different. Lighter. A senior manager from the regional office named Diane was brought in to cover operations temporarily. She was efficient and respectful and introduced herself to each team member individually. On her first morning, she stopped by my desk and told me the Hartwell tracking system was excellent. I thanked her and went back to work. The team moved through those 10 days quietly. Conversations in the kitchen were more open. Marcus seemed to breathe differently. Camille laughed at something on her second day back that I did not think she would have allowed herself to laugh at a week earlier. I filed an updated report on Hartwell and sent it to Felix. He responded within the hour, calling it perfect. On the 8th day, Tobias stopped by. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "You changed something in here," he said, gesturing at the office. "People feel it." I did not know what to say. So I nodded and said I was glad. On the 10th business day, Patricia called me into her office. She was sitting with a folder open in front of her. She gestured to the chair across from her. She had the stillness of someone who had done difficult things for a long time and knew how to carry them. "The investigation is complete," she said. She told me the findings in careful, professional language. Philip had been found in violation of 3 separate company policies: conduct unbecoming a manager, misrepresentation of team performance in executive reporting, creating a hostile working environment. The last finding had been supported by the additional staff statements. Philip Graves had been terminated, effective immediately. His system access had been revoked. His belongings would be couriered to his home. I had imagined this moment many times in recent weeks. I had expected to feel something sharp and large when it arrived. Triumph. Or relief so strong it brought tears. What I actually felt was quieter than that. Slow, warm settling. Like putting down something heavy after carrying it for a long time. Not victory exactly. Something more like correctness. Like the world rearranging back into the shape it should always have been. "Thank you for bringing this forward," Patricia said. "It takes courage." I looked at the folder on her desk and thought about 3 years of careful work. "It takes preparation," I said. There was one more thing Patricia told me in that meeting. Following the investigation, the executive team had conducted a performance review across the department. As part of that review, they had examined the Hartwell account documentation trail specifically. The CEO of Crestfield Solutions, a woman named Adrienne Park, had personally reviewed the tracking system I had built for Felix's team. She had also read the January email where Felix called our service the most organized it had been in 2 years. Adrienne had asked Patricia who specifically had designed the system and managed the account turnaround. Patricia had given her my name. 2 days after my meeting with Patricia, I received a calendar invitation from Adrienne's assistant. The subject line said simply, "Introduction, Nadine." I read that subject line 3 times. Then I looked around the office. At Marcus reviewing a supplier report. At Camille on a call, making notes in her careful handwriting. At Tobias reading something at his desk. 3 years of quiet, careful work. 3 years of keeping records and doing the job properly and refusing shortcuts even when shortcuts would have been easier. All of it had always been visible. I had just needed to make sure the right person finally saw it. I accepted the invitation and went back to work. The meeting with Adrienne Park lasted 30 minutes. Her office was on the top floor of our building. The view looked out over the whole district. She was direct and unpretentious. She asked me to walk her through the Hartwell account from the beginning. I did. I showed her the tracking system, the communication restructure, the reporting template, and the documentation from the Memphis delay. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked what I would change about how the accounts team operated if I had the authority. I had not expected that question. But I had been forming opinions for 3 years, so I answered honestly. I talked about documentation standards, communication protocols with clients, how performance reviews failed to capture the work that actually drove results. Adrienne listened and made notes on a yellow legal pad. At the end she said, "I'm going to have a more formal conversation with you in the next 2 weeks. But I want you to know that what you did took real clarity. Not just the recording, the preparation behind it. That's a different kind of intelligence." I walked back to my desk feeling something I had not felt inside that building for a very long time. Respected. 2 weeks later I was offered a promotion. The role was accounts team lead, a newly defined position that had not existed in the company structure before. It carried a salary increase of 22% and a direct reporting line to the regional director. The mandate was to review and update the department's operational procedures. It was a role that had been built in response to everything that had happened. Patricia delivered the offer in writing and told me I had 1 week to consider it. I called my mother that evening and told her the full story for the first time. From Vera leaving to the recorder on the table to Adrienne's office on the top floor. My mother listened to all of it. When I finished she asked one question. "Are you going to take it?" I thought about Marcus and Camille and Tobias. I thought about Diane's respectful management and how different the office had felt since Philip's door went dark. I thought about the Hartwell tracking system and Felix's email calling it the most organized service in 2 years. And I thought about sitting in that meeting room with 3 words already formed in my throat. I don't think so. Yes, I told her. I'm taking it. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Good, she said. You earned every bit of it. On my last day as a regular accounts manager, something happened I had not planned for. I arrived at 8:45, made coffee, and worked through my handover documents. Every active account was fully documented with history, current status, and recommended next steps. I had built templates for whoever would take over my cases. At 11 o'clock, Marcus walked over to my desk carrying a small envelope. From the team, he said. We passed it around yesterday while you were in the Hartwell debrief. Inside was a card. On the front was a simple design. Inside, in various handwriting styles, were signatures and short notes from 17 members of the team. Tobias had written, "You showed us what standing firm looks like. Thank you." Camille had written, "I should have spoken sooner. Thank you for speaking when you did." Marcus had written just 4 words. But they were exactly the right 4 words. "We see you, Nadine." I sat at my desk with the card in my hands. The office moved around me with its usual sounds. Keyboards and low voices and the coffee machine that always worked. I had not done any of this for recognition. I had done it because silence had become a cost I was no longer willing to pay. But holding that card, I understood what collective things can mean. What it costs people to finally find their voices. And what it gives them when someone finds theirs first. It has been 4 months since Philip Graves told me to get on my knees. Philip did not find another management position quickly. I heard through professional contacts that background checks had surfaced the termination and its reasons at 2 firms in our industry. I do not follow his story. It is not mine to follow. Marcus received a new client portfolio that actually reflected his experience. He seemed, in the months that followed, slightly unfolded. More willing to speak in meetings. Camille submitted a process improvement proposal that Diane adopted within 3 weeks. It was a good idea that should have been heard years earlier. Tobias remained exactly himself, which was already more than enough. I started my new role on a Monday morning in early spring. I sat in a different chair at a different desk, with a view of the whole floor. I spent my first week listening to what the team needed, to where the systems were broken, to what people had been wanting to say for a long time but had not had the right space to say it. I thought about the recorder on the table, about 3 words spoken into a silent room. The people who try to humiliate you can end up exposing themselves. But only if you are prepared. Only if you have done the quiet, careful work that nobody notices until the exact moment it must be seen. Do the work. Keep the records. Stay ready. Your moment will come.